I'm here today with State Fire Marshal Chris Connealy. Chris, as a Texas State Fire Marshal, what is your responsibility when it comes to the fire safety of state office buildings, which include state universities and dormitories, as well as commercial buildings in general across the state?
Well, Mark, the State Fire Marshal Office, we're responsible, we're the authority having jurisdiction for about approximately 14,000 state buildings, ranging from state universities, the dormitories, as you expect, prisons, state hospitals, state supported living centers, office buildings, what have you. Texas does not have a statewide fire code, so we are not responsible for private buildings unless there's a complaint, and then we'll go investigate any fire hazards there. Local jurisdictions will handle those, such in your more populated areas around the state.
You're a big proponent of sprinkler systems in commercial buildings as well as homes. What got you to that point?
Well, I've been a firefighter for almost 40 years. Rarely see any issues in buildings with sprinklers. But more importantly, looked at the data. We are a repository for all the fire data in Texas, and we send that up to the U.S. Fire Administration in Maryland. That said, our data shows that we don't have anyone dying in sprinklered buildings across Texas, and both state buildings as well as private sector buildings. So that ranging from apartments, the fire code changed in 2003 that all apartments had to be sprinklered. And so then look at all the commercial buildings such as high rises, office buildings, warehouses, on and on. No one is dying in Texas, and then the similar data is across the nation. And so it's extremely rare you have any death or an injury unless the person is intimate with fire before the sprinklers activate. That's why I'm a fan of sprinklers.
We have seen some high-rise fires, though, around the country. We've seen them in Dubai. We've seen them in London. We've seen them elsewhere where these high-rise facilities caught fire, and we lost many lives. And it turns out every one of these did not have sprinkler systems. You got to ask why.
Exactly. And the national codes changed in the mid-'70s to start requiring high-rises to be sprinklered. They're very difficult fires to fight from the firefighting operation side of it. And so we're a big proponent, all fire professionals, of sprinkling all buildings, but especially high-rises because they're so difficult to fight.
Well, I can't just sit here and ask you softball questions the entire interview. So let's talk about the state of Texas. There are some high-rise facilities. I'm sure there are some state office facilities that do not have sprinkler systems. How dangerous, how concerned are you as the state fire marshal that this exists?
Well, we do risk-based inspections. So those buildings that are not sprinklered, we prioritize those to do more inspections. Buildings that are inspected according to the fire code regulations are safer typically than those buildings that are not inspected. So that's how we try to minimize it, but certainly they'd be safer with sprinklers, and the state of Texas is doing a good job. I use an example of universities. They retrofit their buildings as time goes on, and so has in other state buildings right here in downtown Austin. And so we're a big proponent of that. So it's a long-term goal, but many of these buildings were built prior to the mid-'70s, and so it's going to take time to get those fully sprinklered.
I assume you've got dormitories where you've got hundreds of kids living. You may have nursing homes. I'm sure you have other type of residential property, probably in every major city of the state that do not have a sprinkler system.
Yes, this is a problem not throughout Texas, but in the nation. And so we have a lot of older infrastructure that's not sprinklered. They'll have standpipe systems and things where the firefighters connect their hoses. But again, that's much more difficult. It takes more time to get those systems in place to fight the fire. The challenge is most people die very early in the fire. And as you saw with the London high-rise and Dubai and other places, it very easily can that fire grows to such a magnitude that there's many deaths, such as what you had 80+ people in London. And so these are preventable deaths in my mind. But we have to get sprinklers, and we recognize that many buildings were built before the code required it.
Give us some history. So when was that code?
In the mid-1970s is typically when the code changed on both the International Fire Code as well as the NFPA, National Fire Protection Association codes. And so it's just, it took time. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in 1911 in New York City. That was one of the big reasons why codes slowly change, but from many past tragedies where the common denominator was a lack of sprinklers.
You know, if you have one bad fire in Texas at one of these high-rise facilities without a sprinkler system, you're going to have lawmakers and everybody else just clamoring and probably going to be pointed toward you, right?
Right, and that's why we certainly do these inspections and document them, and certainly note that we would like to see sprinkler systems added as the state has funding to upgrade those buildings, just like they do in the private sector. And so it's a long-term process, but nevertheless, the data overwhelmingly reinforces the value of sprinklers, and that's why even where most fires occur in the home, and that's where the real fire problem is in America. And we have about 2,500 Americans die by fire in the home. 160 to 170 Texans typically die each year. But they happen as one death or two deaths at a time, and it doesn't get as much attention as these high-rise fires. And so I'm a strong proponent of, we have to educate what I refer to our customers as Mrs. Smith. She doesn't know that she needs a sprinkler system in her home. She sees them at the hotels that she stays at and the office buildings where she works, but she don't see them in her home. And so we need to educate, do a better job in the fire service to educate citizens the value of sprinklers in their home. And then ultimately that'll change the market, and more builders will offer that feature.
A couple of states, it's mandatory where new homes, they have to have sprinkler systems, correct?
California and Maryland, that's correct.
But the problem, you seem to run into a roadblock, I guess, when it comes to building contractors wanting to put these into homes. Is that the problem?
Well, there's an additional cost. Roughly about $2 a square foot is what's the average to install a residential fire sprinkler system. So you got 2,000 square foot homes, about $2,400 additional to the price of the home. And so that's a concern amongst in the private sector to add that additional cost that may prevent home buyers qualifying for a mortgage. But as with all upgrades, we see it with interior design, with HGTV and other TV channels promoting granite countertops and wood flooring, what have you. We got to do the same thing with home sprinklers, and where they see the value of it. And so that family says, I want to see fire sprinklers in my home. How can you provide that to me? And when that market changes through education, then we'll be down that path.
I guess that's going to be one of those wait and see.
It's a long-term goal.
State Fire Marshal Chris Connealy.